$2.5 trillion of trade, 90% of the world's most advanced chips, all through a strip of water 81 miles wide. The Taiwan Strait is the only choke point on Earth where one closure crashes the global semiconductor supply chain in 48 hours. The US Pentagon thinks China will be ready to move on Taiwan by 2027. This is the math of what happens when 110 miles of water decides who runs the next decade of technology. The Taiwan Strait runs about 220 miles long and 110 miles wide on average. At its narrowest, between Hsinchu in Taiwan and Pington Island on the mainland, it is roughly 81 miles across. Most of the strait is shallower than 500 feet. In 1955, a US Air Force general named Benjamin Davis drew an unofficial line down the middle of the strait. Beijing has never recognized it. Taipei treats it like an international border. In 2024, People's Liberation Army aircraft crossed that line on 209 separate days. The mainland side is 6 minutes by missile, 12 minutes by jet. Underwater, 14 submarine cables land on Taiwan. They carry about half of all internet traffic between the United States and Asia. In February 2023, 2 of those cables to the Matsu Islands were cut by Chinese vessels. 14,000 residents lost connectivity for 50 days. The Coast Guard could not say which boats did it. Nobody was charged. Now the chip math. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, founded 1987 by Morris Chang, a Texas Instruments veteran the Taiwanese government recruited home with state seed capital. Today, TSMC manufactures about 62% of all chips made for outside customers. But the real number is this. TSMC makes about 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors. 3 nanometer, 5 nanometer, the chips inside the iPhone you are watching this on, the chips inside NVIDIA's H100 GPUs that train every large language model on the planet. Apple alone is 22% of TSMC's revenue. NVIDIA is 12%. AMD, Qualcomm, Broadcom, each in the high single digits. TSMC's revenue in 2024 was about $90 billion. Its market value passed $1 trillion. Morris Chang has a phrase for this. He calls it the Silicon Shield. The idea is that no rational actor would invade Taiwan, because invading Taiwan destroys the chips, and destroying the chips destroys the global economy. The United States bet $52 billion on the opposite theory. The CHIPS Act of 2022 pays TSMC, Intel, and Samsung to build advanced fabs on American soil. TSMC took $6.5 billion in subsidies for 3 fabs in Arizona. The first fab went into early production in late 2024 on 4 nanometer. 2 nanometer is still 5 years away. Right now, in 2026, if the strait closes, there is no backup. The shield is also the trap. The chips are the headline. They are not the whole story. $2.5 trillion of goods transit the Taiwan Strait every year. That is the Center for Strategic and International Studies estimate. About 1/5 of global maritime trade passes through it. 25% of the world's semiconductor trade physically moves across this water. South Korean memory chips heading to American data centers. Japanese precision tools heading to Taiwanese fabs. Chinese electronics heading to European consumers. 40% of all containerized goods bound for North Asia transit the strait. The Rhodium Group modeled what happens if Beijing imposes a quarantine. Not a war, just a blockade. $10 trillion wiped from global GDP in the first year. About 10% of world output. Bloomberg Economics ran a different model. They got similar numbers. For comparison, the 2008 financial crisis cost the world about $2 trillion. COVID lockdowns cost about $3 trillion. A Taiwan Strait closure is bigger than both, combined by a factor of 2. The strait is not just where the chips go, it is where the global economy quietly breathes. In March 2021, U.S. Admiral Philip Davidson testified to the Senate Armed Services Committee. He said the Chinese threat to Taiwan would manifest in his judgment within the next 6 years. That window closes in 2027. Davidson retired 3 weeks later. The phrase stuck. In 2024 alone, China ran 2 major joint military exercises around Taiwan. Joint Sword 2024A in May right after Lai Ching-te's inauguration. Joint soared 2024B in October. The second one was different. It rehearsed a quarantine, boarding and inspecting commercial ships in Taiwan's ports. Not invasion, economic suffocation. The US Navy's 7th Fleet is headquartered in Yokosuka, Japan. The Great Circle distance to Taipei is about 1,300 miles. A carrier strike group takes roughly 70 hours to arrive on station. The People's Liberation Army Rocket Force operates the DF-26 anti-ship ballistic missile. Range about 2,500 miles. Estimated unit cost around $20 million. The US Navy's main interceptor, the SM-3 Block 2A, costs about $28 million per round. The math gets worse from there. China can fire 100 missiles for the price of one American carrier, but Beijing does not have to fire a missile. February 2023. 2 Chinese vessels, a fishing boat and a sand dredger, cut both submarine cables to the Matsu Islands. 14,000 residents went offline for 50 days. The Coast Guard could not prove intent. Nobody was charged. The cost to China of cutting those cables was a tank of diesel. The cost to global confidence was incalculable. Then came the GPS spoofing. Reports of ships off the Taiwan coast suddenly showing positions hundreds of miles inland. Then the fishing fleet swarms, then the Coast Guard boarding inspections of Taiwanese-flagged ferries. Each move was deniable. Each move was sub-threshold. This is what military analysts now call the gray zone. The Taiwan Strait is the largest live laboratory for it on the planet. There are 15 named chokepoints on Earth where global trade narrows to a thread. The Suez Canal, the Strait of Hormuz, the Panama Canal, the Bab el-Mandeb, the Bosphorus, the Malacca Strait. The Taiwan Strait is the only one of them that also produces 90% of the world's most advanced chips. The only one where the bottleneck and the factory are the same place. That is what makes it different. That is why Washington watches it every hour. Next week on Chokepoint, we map the chokepoint that everyone forgets, the South China Sea, where 1/3 of global trade transits and 7 countries claim the same water. Subscribe, new Chokepoint every Wednesday.